The house was already quiet by the time the dishwasher finished its cycle. The lights in the kitchen were still on, bright against the empty countertops, while the rest of the room sat dark and unused. The living room furniture had been chosen carefully years earlier. Durable fabrics, neutral colors, pieces that were supposed to last through different phases of life. Most nights, no one sat there anymore. The television stayed off. The room existed mostly as square footage, something paid for monthly, walked through occasionally, cleaned on weekends, and then left alone again. When the house was bought, it made sense. It looked responsible on paper. It was in a good neighborhood, the kind people nod at when you mention the zip code. The schools were well regarded. The streets were quiet. The lawns were trimmed regularly, not because anyone loved mowing, but because everyone else did it too. The house had an extra bedroom, plus a finished basement that could be used later. It felt like planning ahead instead of reacting. It felt like adulthood done correctly. At the time, the payment was manageable. It took up more of the paycheck than the previous place, but not dangerously so. The numbers worked if nothing went wrong, and for a while, nothing did. The first few years passed with the usual rhythm. Work during the week, errands on weekends, occasional dinners out, birthdays celebrated at home because there was finally space for it. The mortgage statement arrived each month, glanced at briefly, then filed away. The balance moved slowly, but no one expected it to move fast. The commute lengthened immediately. The house was farther from work than the apartment had been. In the beginning, the drive felt temporary, something that would eventually feel normal. Traffic patterns were learned, back roads memorized, the gas budget quietly adjusted upward. Oil changes happened more often. Tires wore down faster than expected. None of it felt dramatic enough to worry about. It was just the cost of living where things were nicer. Over time, the drive stopped feeling temporary. It became part of the day's structure. Leaving earlier in the morning, getting home later in the evening, dinner happening later than planned, sometimes eaten standing at the counter. The extra bedroom stayed empty most of the time. The basement was finished but rarely used, holding boxes labeled with intentions rather than contents. Holiday decorations, old clothes, items kept because there was space to keep them. The house itself required attention. Bigger roof, bigger yard, more walls to paint. Repairs came in pairs rather than singles. When one thing broke, another seemed close behind. The furnace needed servicing. The fence leaned after a storm. The driveway cracked slowly, one line becoming two. Each repair felt reasonable on its own. Home ownership always involved maintenance. That was known. The total only became visible when looking back, not while paying it. As incomes rose modestly over the years, the house absorbed most of the increase. Property taxes climbed. Insurance premiums followed. Utilities cost more simply because there was more air to heat and cool. The payment stayed the same, but the house's pull on cash did not. Raises didn't change life much. They stabilized it. They prevented stress rather than creating freedom. Social life shifted without being announced. Friends who lived closer to the city stopped visiting as often. The drive was inconvenient for them too. Hosting felt more like an obligation than a pleasure. Preparing the house, cleaning rooms that no one usually used, making sure the place looked like it was supposed to look. When guests left, the silence felt heavier, spreading across rooms that had briefly been filled and then emptied again. The neighborhood stayed polite and distant. People waved while backing out of driveways. Conversations stayed surface level. Everyone was busy. Everyone was tired. Weekend mornings filled with lawn equipment noise, then fell quiet again by afternoon. No one lingered outside for long. The houses were designed for privacy, and they delivered it effectively. Years passed without a single dramatic event. No crisis forced a reckoning. The house simply became the backdrop of adult life. Work changed roles, titles shifted, responsibilities increased. The house stayed the same size. It didn't shrink to match how it was actually used. Rooms remained closed most days, doors kept shut to save on heating and cooling. Lights stayed off unless needed. Space turned into something managed rather than enjoyed. When the kids grew older, the distance mattered more. Driving to activities took time. Coordinating schedules meant more miles, more evenings spent in the car. Gas prices fluctuated, sometimes noticeably, sometimes not. The household adjusted without talking about it. Fewer spontaneous outings, more planning. The house anchored everything geographically, and everything else had to bend around it. At work, opportunities appeared occasionally, a different role, a position that would have meant relocating closer to the office or even changing cities. Each time, the house entered the conversation silently. Selling it would involve costs. Buying again would mean higher prices elsewhere. Starting over felt exhausting. The safest choice was staying put. Stability became its own reason. Savings grew slowly, then plateaued. Retirement accounts received steady contributions, but never quite as much as planned. There was always something related to the house that came first, a repair, an upgrade that felt necessary to maintain value, replacing something before it failed completely. The logic always sounded practical. Deferred maintenance would only cost more later. The mortgage balance ticked downward year by year. Progress was real but unsatisfying. The numbers moved too slowly to feel rewarding. The house appreciated on paper, but that appreciation remained abstract. It couldn't be accessed without giving up the place itself. It existed mostly as reassurance, something to point to when thinking about net worth, not something that changed daily life. Vacations shortened. Not intentionally at first, just fewer long trips, more driving destinations instead of flights. Time off felt expensive, even when the paycheck continued. Being away from the house meant worrying about it. Storms, power outages, maintenance issues that always seemed to happen at inconvenient times. Staying close felt easier. As the kids eventually moved out, the house did not adjust. Bedrooms emptied, then stayed empty. Furniture remained where it had always been. Nothing felt urgent enough to change. Downsizing was discussed occasionally, usually late at night, usually without energy. The idea of sorting through years of accumulated things felt heavier than continuing to live among them. The commute remained. Traffic patterns changed slightly over the years, sometimes worse, rarely better. Construction zones appeared and disappeared. The car aged faster than expected, replaced once, then again. Each replacement came with higher prices than the last. The distance that once felt acceptable now felt draining, but it was familiar. Familiarity outweighed comfort. Work life became more demanding as seniority increased. Longer hours, more responsibility, less flexibility. Leaving earlier or arriving later was noticed. The commute boxed the day in tightly. There was little room to adjust without affecting everything else. The house's location quietly enforced a schedule. On weekends, time was spent maintaining the house rather than enjoying it. Projects stretched over months. Paint cans stacked in the garage. Tools bought for single uses, then stored. The yard demanded attention in every season. Leaves in the fall, snow in the winter, growth in the spring, heat management in the summer. It was a cycle that never paused. Neighbors moved in and out. Some downsized, some upgraded, some disappeared without explanation. The neighborhood aged slowly. Lawns stayed neat. Houses remained occupied. Life inside them changed quietly, unseen. Everyone seemed to be managing their own version of the same situation. When retirement planning conversations became more concrete, the house loomed large again. It was an asset, technically. It was also a cost that never fully went away. Even paid off, it would require money, taxes, insurance, maintenance. The idea of carrying it indefinitely felt different than it had decades earlier. The extra space that once symbolized preparation now felt like weight. Cleaning took longer. Heating unused rooms felt wasteful. Closing them off felt symbolic in a way that was hard to name. The house had been built for a fuller version of life than the one currently lived inside it. Selling remained an option in theory. In practice, it stayed postponed. The market shifted, interest rates changed, timing never felt right. There was always a reason to wait one more year, one more season, one more milestone. Friends who had chosen smaller places nearby talked about walking to work, about time reclaimed. Their homes sounded cramped at times, inconvenient in different ways. No choice seemed perfect. Every decision carried its own costs. This one had simply unfolded slowly enough to avoid alarm. Looking around the house now, the value was visible but muted. The walls held years of repainting. The floors showed wear in familiar paths. The extra rooms held echoes rather than activity. The house had delivered what it promised: stability, space, respectability. It had also quietly absorbed time, energy, and flexibility, year after year, without ever asking permission. Some evenings, after the dishes were done and the lights were turned off, the silence felt expansive rather than peaceful. The house stood still, waiting for a life that had already moved through it. Nothing was wrong. Nothing was broken. The cost had already been paid, not in one moment, but in thousands of ordinary days.